Well, hello and welcome to the Hope Cymru Talk Show. I'm Marcus Nelson. I'm joined today by Dave Gobbett. Dave, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing, Dave. I'm the lead pastor of Highfields Church here in Cardiff. We've been here for a little over 9 years and married to Sally. We've got 4 kids between the ages of 14 and 7 and love serving the Lord Jesus here in this beautiful city.
Fantastic, and it's great to be able to chat and have this conversation together. Dave, today we're going to be asking this question and thinking about why is it that so many people dislike politicians? Let's just go for the stats to show that I'm not making that question up. A large-scale poll taken in 2018 across 27 countries found that more than half the people right across those range of countries weren't happy with the democracy which was being delivered in those countries. There was a feeling that individual rights were being infringed, out-of-touch elites further and further away from the ordinary people. No matter who wins an election, it doesn't make any difference as to what's happening. So much corruption among politicians, and that nothing really ever changes. Then there was another poll taken in 2021 in which it was found in the UK that trust in politicians is at an all-time low, with 2/3 of people on average saying that they think that politicians are only out for themselves. Dave, why is it that at the moment so many people dislike politicians?
Oh, well, look, I'm sure the comment about trust is a helpful one. We get the politicians that we deserve, it's worth stating. And I have friends who are politicians, and I think they serve well. I do know that, and we all know, look, we have been let down. Hypocrisy is just galling. And when we hear people telling us to do one thing and then doing the opposite, that is just grim beyond measure. And that is happening everywhere, sadly. So I think the hypocrisy that is perceived on the one hand is one point. I think. You've stated here. The fact is, whoever you vote in, even if there's a kind of a sudden change and we move from a coalition government to a majority government, from Conservative to Labour, whatever it may be, it's kind of more of the same, really. Things don't massively change on the ground in terms of the potholes on my street or the quality of the schools or the waiting lists in the hospitals, etc. Across the UK, you had a Conservative Westminster, Scotland was SNP, and Wales was Labour, and did any of those nations cover themselves in absolute glory during the pandemic and in the lockdowns and the afterflow? Well, we can certainly see the mistakes that people made, absolutely, obviously, but nowhere kind of received the great acclaim, and even right now, in our political life, we're seeing politicians being arrested or being humiliated or being booted out of their own party, or kind of issues to do with who knows what, allegations, etc. So I'm not surprised that there is disillusionment the right word? I don't know. I suppose disillusionment is when you have high expectations and they are failed to deliver on. I think increasingly they're probably at pretty low expectations, and so if any politician does anything that even slightly good and appreciated, then wow, we're surprised that way. And the thing that does get me, we were saying about this earlier, is that even though expectations I think are pretty low, and there is greater sense of disengagement, and there is a distrust, and politicians, if you think of the kind of the most hated professions in a given society, you think of the tax officers, whatever, and parking attendants. Politicians are in that league, I think. They're not treated like they are intended to be servants, which is what their role is. But so there is great disillusionment. But then every few years, every 4 years, 5 years, whatever, when the next general election comes round, we do have this. Suddenly we're all like, we're hearing great promises, and the expectations start to go up, and we think this person is going to be the great solutions coming on the riding white horse, and he's going to fix all our problems, and waiting lists are going to go down, and education will be fine, and families are going to be fixed, and etc., and the economy will boom, and I do think that betrays, even though we have every reason to feel a bit very let down and disillusioned and all that stuff. I do think that we have within us as human beings, and I would say this, a longing for a Messiah to come to our aid.
Interesting take,
I do
interesting.
think I do think that we all know that we need fixing, and that someone can come and who makes big promises.
Yes,
Could you fix us? And
Can
guess
actually
what?
deliver.
There is someone who can do that.
There is someone who can
It's
actually.
not in those places.
There is someone who can do that. Leslie Newbegin, Dave spoke about the 20th century. It's not in any way meant to be, this not party political discussion in any way at all, a bigger theological discussion. He described the 20th century as a century of rising expectations as to what any government of any political party would be able to deliver. One of the recommendations that the think tank that responded to that 2021 poll, which found that 2/3 of the people believe that politicians are just out for themselves, was that there is too big a gap between what can be delivered by central government and what the expectation on the ground is. Why do you think there is felt to be a need to narrow that gap? Why are we looking to central government to fulfill and to meet demands that can't really be done by anyone on that sort of level? Is it because we've forgotten a higher door that we could be knocking on?
Well, if the politicians are the people with the most power that we have access to, then we want them to deliver on the power which we've given them. If they have been elected and they got our vote or the majority of the votes, etc., then there's nowhere else to go. Yes, there are other people who we invest in, like corporations and or unions or whatever our kind of particular bent is. But the people with the real power, I know you could say, well, it's the Jeff Bezoses of this world, or it's the Bill Gates or Klaus Schwab, or big multinationals or corporations who have the power. But in our area, in our space, whether it's in Wales or in the UK, the politicians are the ones with the power, but they're not really. And so we do expect them to deliver and to make life better for us, whether it's economically or socially, or in terms of the public services, etc., environmentally, and so the issue is that we have forgotten that we can go higher, and we're settling for this level, and guess what? This level is not going to be able to deal with the big issues. The fact is, our problems are much bigger and deeper. The holes are the potholes of society are much bigger than just a little bit of a local council can throw some tarmac in there. They go down at the level of our identities and at the level of our deep brokenness, in terms of family and in terms of
those problems are profound, they're profound. But some years ago in New York, there was a terrible incident with a young lady. The mayor of that area and then the local councillor was asked, how could this happen? To which the local councillor just gave the honest answer that he doesn't have time, to hear the cries of everyone in his constituency, in his neighbourhood, even within his own family. And he said that, if he was expected to hear the cry of every person in that vast area, it would be like hearing the sound of every blade of grass and the heartbeat of every squirrel. And that he said it would be deafening on the other side of silence. Is there anyone who does have the capacity to hear the heartbeat of every squirrel, the sound of every blade of grass, a higher authority and power, even than Westminster or the White House or Beijing?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about this one. Tell me.
I've been teaching, we have a ministry training course in our church, and I've been teaching through the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel, if it says anything, it says quite clearly the centerpiece of the book of Daniel, Daniel 4 and 5, the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. There is a higher throne. And Nebuchadnezzar may be the king on the throne, Belshazzar may be the king on the throne, Putin may be the potentate. You roll that down into our area, Mr. Drakeford or Mr. Sunak or Hamza Yusuf in Scotland, etc. These may seem to have the levers. They may be the ones who are really making things work. But there's a higher throne, and there's in fact Daniel 4 says that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of earth and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of men.
And I wonder who that is.
That is, like, of all the ways that God would establish, his pecking order? Does he have the biggest, strongest fighter at the top of the kind of, your flyweight, middleweight, heavyweight, super heavyweight? Is it like the super heavyweight champion at the top of the tree? It's actually the lowliest. It's the servant king. It's the Son of Man who is given glory and honor as he enters into the Ancient of Days. In Daniel 7, our Lord Jesus, who's now been crowned with glory and honor, and he is, of course, on the higher throne. And so yes, so we've got to probably reduce our expectations for what the lower thrones can do, the lower seats of government and responsibility, and extend our expectations and our hopes and our longings and our prayers and our eyes towards this higher throne. Now, I would say, and I don't want to suggest, and I think that there have been some streams within Christian thinking that forgets about that lower throne, and it's all about we're just going to be thinking about the higher throne, and we're going to be praying, and we're just society is broken, so we just pray and look to Jesus, and He'll fix it all. Yes. He does, in the scriptures, he does give lower thrones. Even in pagan Rome, he tells the Romans to respect their governing authorities. He tells Christians facing great persecution throughout the modern day Turkey in 1 Peter to say, look, pray for the emperor, etc. These are brutal emperors who are setting Christians on fire to entertain his house guests, and yet the Christians at the time are told to respect, pray for those leaders. And so we do pray for our leaders, and we do seek to be good and wise and loving citizens under their leadership. And we hold them to account, yes. And I would encourage people who are Christian believers to get involved in that mucky business, as Tim Farron describes, in terms of political life, to try to make a bit of a difference, but not to lay all our hopes there. If the moment that is where our hopes lie, we're going to always be disillusioned, disappointed, and surprised that that's the case. Well, we shouldn't be surprised. There's a higher throne. And
as we've got higher expectations of this God, Father, Son, Spirit, who reigns over all the world, who doesn't ever take his eyes off the road or his hands off the wheel, or never drops the ball, but is in control behind and above all the kingdoms of this passing world. And they come and go, don't they, with the tide. And at the same time, higher expectations, lower expectations in a sense, more thankfulness, more genuine support, less criticism, perhaps less negativity, cynicism, all of that. Where does the church fit into all this, Dave? Especially, historically, you'll know, there's been more and more work done in recent years, just showing that so many different aspects of what we just have inherited and received as Western civilization are actually the distinct contributions of the Christian church. Where do we fit the church in, the living God and the thrones and kingdoms of this passing world?
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose we see our political theology slightly differently to different places around the world. So you think of the States, where there's a very clear separation of church and state. In the UK, of course, we have a state church. I happen to be an independent church leader, so my church isn't connected to the state church. But nonetheless, I think God has arranged churches to operate and to serve alongside you. I believe that God has given kind of various spheres of authority. I think there is the sphere of the church as well as the sphere of the family, church, state, etc., government. And we surely have a part to play in terms of beneficent care for people in our communities, the Christians within our communities, but love for neighbour, that's all part and parcel of that. And so I do think there is a responsibility we've got. But back to, I think your point touches on something really profound, which is to say that the part that the Christian church, and I suppose specifically the Christian tradition more generally, has had in making the world that we are in today, actually, and helped by a number of books on this topic. Tom Holland's book Dominion spoke into this, Vishal Mangawadi's book, The Book That Made Your World, and then more recently Glenn Scrivener's little popular book, The Air We Breathe, how each of them have shared the fact that where today we think the values that maybe our kind of the medium thrones, the governments of our age, you really love the values of equality or justice or compassion or consent or progress or fairness, all these things which the perception is that they are secular values, and that sadly at times that our culture uses those values to kind of give a whack on the head to the Christian at times. It's like, you're bad on equality, you're bad on justice, you're bad on fairness and progress and all this kind of science and so forth, tolerance. So whack the Christians, get back and conform to our secular way.
Yes,
Actually, those values themselves have grown out of Christian soil and Christian reflection. If you go back to the pre-Christian time, and this is Tom Holland's point. He's an ancient historian. You go back to before the Christian story has kind of kicked in the first century onwards. Ancient Greece and the Roman Empire is not a place of great progress and great tolerance and great equality and great fairness and great inclusivity, and it's a barbaric, brutal place. It was the Christians who started the hospitals. It was the Christians who started the education movement. It was the Christians who started rescuing little children who were being exposed and laying out on the street. And it was the Christians who were providing hostels for women who had been rejected. It was the Christians who encouraged women to have a kind of responsibility within family, and rather than just being kind of cast away. And the story goes on all the way through history. I'm not saying that Christians have not been the bad guys in the story. Sadly, we have absolutely failed to be Christ's people the way He calls us to be. But it would be totally kind of being a revisionist to retell the story without seeing the impact that the Christian faith has had on the development of our culture, which has led up to the level of the political leadership.
And isn't it fascinating, Dave? I always think the ways in which, of course, there have been dark periods in the past, but those times nearly always correspond to when the church has actually been assimilated into the culture of the day. And what they were doing in that day was completely accepted. We think about apartheid in South Africa, or maybe the national church in National Socialist Germany in the 1930s. At the time, that was the direction of travel. It seemed like the most reasonable thing to do, but then future generations will look back. Bonhoeffer, at the beginning of Ethics, described that process in the 1930s in Germany with the rise of the Third Reich. And I always found that a fascinating description of the way in which he said those up until that point who had been advocating freedom, justice, compassion, equality, and all those values had used those as battering rams against the Christian church to say, the church is opposed to these values and virtues. What he found was that as the lights were going off and the society was degenerating and becoming more and more dark, those same people began to realize that the only place those values could actually be preserved was the place of their origin, which was the Christian church and Jesus Christ himself. And then he has this amazing little throwaway line where he says that, the mother and the children were estranged. And then in the moment of darkness, they recognized one another and came home. And they realized it was only in the church with Jesus that those values could be protected and have a solid foundation. What would it look like, Dave? So what we're saying is, we have higher expectations of a living God. What would that look like? 3 questions all in one. So higher expectations of what this God can do, more realistic expectations of the lower thrones of government, and then greater contribution of the church. What would that look like in those 3 spheres, Dave?
In words
Start high and then move down.
In words of one syllable.
Yes, indeed. Yes, start high and then move down. Okay. What would it look? What could it look like?
I hope that on the first point, I hope it will mean, and I would encourage us to think, going to sleep at night.
Yes,
And
that's no small thing, Dave. That is no small thing. That is no small. I always remember, I'll just tell this before I get carried. I always remember in Bristol, in a really nice part of town, nice restaurant, heard people coming out, in every way presented as, high-flying, successful people, and overheard them having a conversation in which one of them was seriously suggesting that the President of the United States at that point should be assassinated, and they felt like that was the response at that time to what was going on in the world. I thought, what an incredible situation we find ourselves in, that level of angst. So being able to sleep at night is no small thing.
Just go to sleep at night, and
in the knowledge that
he holds the world in his hands, and he will do what he will do, and he will ensure his kingdom grows. We have a part to play, but not a part where we're over controlling things, but and certainly not trusting and going to sleep at night because we've got a great president or a great prime minister or a great king or a great whoever it is in position at last. Yes, all our hopes have been founded on this person getting in, and we finally overturned it. We've overviewed there at that point, I think. So going to sleep at night and getting on our knees before then and praying. He does guide, I believe. He does lead. He raises kings. He brings them down. And just as Daniel in exile was on his knees 3 times a day, that was the thing that got him, wasn't it? What would be the thing that which would get you?
Let's get him on that.
Let's get Christians
exactly.
watching Hope Cymru. I know. Well, they're all known for being on their knees 3 times a day. Even though they're banned, it's illegal. I'm not sure that would catch me. So get on your knees before bed, but go to sleep knowing that there is a God who is unfolding the purposes of his history, his way, his timing. That's the top one. Next one, how can we engage or relate to this lower throne, a more chastened view? I think there, you said this. I think, engaging in it in appropriate ways. Certainly at the level of trust for that level. I think not being snipey and critical. Certainly praying for them. I think personally, I think it's good. It's kind of moving between your second and your third question a little bit, but developing relationships with these individuals, I think I've always found helpful. It's interesting that often, and I've heard this from other Christian MPs, that they only get letters from their constituents when it's a very, very obviously clear kind of moral issue, whether it's a sexuality issue or it's a life issue, abortion issue, and that's what wakes up the church. When actually maybe there's refugee support or financial support or a kind of a food bank issue or education here and environment, and actually if we believe that God is the God of all of these things, then I hope that we would be awakened to being involved in other areas too, other than those hot topic issues that maybe are a natural space. So I think support, prayer, praying for them, writing to them, encouraging them. They are, I think, seeking to serve. It's not impossible that some of them are in it for the acclaim and for the power. We can think of individuals who've exhibited that very well. But I think a lot of them, certainly backbench MPs say, or you don't know their names. They're just kind of anonymously serving, and I think are working really hard and under quite a lot of pressure. And we've known in the last few years of those horrific attacks of Joe Cox or the guy out in South End, and they need our prayers. So I think I'd want to avoid the snipiness and the narkiness that our tabloid media can really go after these in relation to that, and connect. I think at the lower level, God has placed us, on earth, ultimately for His glory and to seek to be ambassadors for His kingdom. But within that, part of that is loving God and loving our neighbour, and that will mean perhaps serving in local government, maybe, or in a local council area. Certainly, I would encourage people to vote in elections and understand what's going on in those areas. Go to hustings, hold people to account. But to keep remembering that the kingdom will not come as we get the perfect government. We've got someone whose government is on their shoulders, and He will bring that in His time, and we can't accelerate that. So a bit more chastened expectation for what we can do while we wait for that great day.
Amazing. That kingdom is universal, room for all the world, all the nations come together, and eternal. There's been the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans and so many others that just come and go. The kingdom of Jesus Christ will never end. Absolutely. There doesn't need to be a successor. He doesn't need to plan for that. Room for us all, and built not on the back of slaves, but on His own shoulders and His own lifeblood shed for us to bring us into His kingdom and family forever. Thank you so much, Dave. We can rest easy. We can sleep tonight, knowing that our Heavenly Father's in control of all things, that all the governors of this passing world are under His control and under His power, and that His church, the Church of Jesus Christ, is living His life, turning the world upside down the right way up. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
God bless you.